onboarding specialist for Concordia Technology Solutions. You can reach me one of two ways. You can reach me at by email at rod.kyles@cph.org, and you can also reach me by phone at 314-268-1315. It's usually easier to reach me by email than by phone, but you definitely can leave a message if you'd like. Today we are going to go through Church360 Ledger. Is going to be a complete overview, and we're going to start out and talk about the company a little bit as a whole and our division here, Concordia Technology Solutions. We are the church administration division of Concordia Publishing House. The company has been around since 1869, so it's been around quite a few years now, and been going pretty strong. Here there's the Concordia Technology Solution, and it's the developing software arm for the for Concordia Publishing House. So we've been working with church software since 1984, and it's been going well. We've moved from desktop software into doing web-based software, and the Church360 products are the web-based software that we're going to be offering here in the future. So some housekeeping measures to discuss. We're going to start out and go through our 60-minute presentation where we'll talk about the software, aspects of using the software, best practices. And then at the end, we'll have 30 minutes for questions. So if I don't answer all your questions during the session, you can definitely take time to type those questions into the question box, and I'll make sure to answer those at the end of the session. So, and ask questions throughout. So it is first come, first serve basis. So when you type in your question, that'll be the first one that I answer there toward the end of the session. So we are going to be recording this webinar, so if you want to view it, it will be posted on YouTube, and we do have other webinars on YouTube as well for reviewing and your viewing pleasure there. So Church360 Ledger is the financial component for our Church360 product line. So Church360 as a whole is the umbrella for 3 different products, and Church360 Ledger being the financial portion, but there's also Church360 Members, which is the church management part. So that's where you would track your members, record any attendance that takes place, and also record any offerings that are entered into the system. And then there's also Church360 Unite, and that would be the website component for Church360. And that allows you to go in and post calendars out on the web, enter in photos from recent events, allow you to go in and have an online directory where people can log in and view that directory. There's numerous parts or numerous functions of Unite that you can view and use. But our primary focus today will be on Church360 Ledger. Church360 Ledger has 3 main tenets. It's going to be the fact that it's intuitive, that it's secure, and that it's focused. Now, the thought is that when working with Church360 Ledger, it should be intuitive enough to use without a whole lot of training, but we're definitely here to help you along the way if you need help. We do offer customer onboarding, and we have support technicians to help out if you have any questions. I guess the primary component is going to be secure. The product is secure on secured servers, and even though you can access it from the website, it's backed up continuously. Not every minute, but we do keep backups for 30 days, and if anything was to happen, we could restore that backup and put your information back into place. So, and then it's also focused for churches. There's plenty of options out there for churches when it comes to financial software, but all financial software does not focus on churches. So you could have personal finances, you could have business finances, and those are on 2 different sides of the spectrum there. Some require more information, some require less information, but we're hoping to find the balance between the two with the ministry focus with our software. So As we go forward, we're going to go through an overview of Church360 Ledger, going through all of the main features so that you'll be familiar with the product. We'll also have a tour of the software. So after we complete the PowerPoint here, we'll transition into the software and take you through a real-life example of how to use the software. And then we'll have our question and answer session at the end. So when dealing with church management software, lots of times you're going to be talking about church finances, and there's times that it is difficult. Every dollar has to be donated, and every donation comes from the heart. So anytime that you receive those donations, you're going to take them and you're going to enter them into the software. This makes stewardship critical. And this makes accountability critical as well. What does accountability look like? We definitely want to prevent ill intention from doing wrong. So we want to make sure that we have the information in the system and that it's secured. But we want to have things set up in a way so that we can review it and keep track of it. We also want to prevent the well-intended from making mistakes. Church360 Ledger is designed to prevent common mistakes from happening. There's restrictions within the software that will stop the inappropriate accounts from being used in transactions, and also warn you when mistakes are being made. So, how do you do this in your congregation? We're going to have different types of people that we focus on. There's going to be a volunteer ministry treasurer. There's also going to be paid finance coordinators. You'll have elected church treasurers and an elected finance board. And with these different divisions in the church, you'll be able to track your accountability and keep everybody accountable through using the software. Church360 Ledger was designed to increase accountability. Inside the software, which we'll show here shortly, there's going to be different permission groups and roles to where you can lock down different parts of the software so that accessing that part of the software will either be allowed or denied. So Church360 Ledger was designed to prevent mistakes, as I mentioned before. When creating transactions and adding in accounts, it will keep an eye on you and help you with that process. So we did this by focusing on two key personas. And when you're working with the church, there's going to be the church treasurer, of course. This person's typically going to be an experienced accountant, but not always. This person's going to oversee all aspects of the software. This person's really going to be detail-oriented and care about the details, and they're going to rely on the audit trail. And the person that typically tag teams with this person is going to be our willing volunteer. This person is going to balance the checkbook. They're going to go through and enter in transactions. They're going to care about ministry, and they really don't want to make mistakes. Sometimes these roles are filled by the same person, and lots of times there are separate people. There can be more than one person who accesses the software. So, and Church360 Ledger will provide accountability for both of them and the accountability that they require. So as we proceed, we're definitely going to go through real-life examples of how to start from scratch and even set up your accounts within the system. So we'll go through every single aspect of setting up the software. We're not going to start with a blank database. We have one that's set up so that you can see a chart of accounts and see transactions that are in the system with balances, but we're going to have a real-life example where you can see things being set up and created. We're going to explore all the areas of the software, so we'll talk about the different parts and areas of the software. And while we're going through this process, I'd like to ask that you think to yourself, how can I use Church360 to support my ministry in my church? So a real-life example that we're going to use is cancer care ministry. I'm not personally participating in the cancer care ministry, but I think this is a perfect example of how you can utilize Church360 Ledger. So there's going to be a support group that works with the cancer care ministry. There's going to be in-reach and outreach. So they'll be reaching out to people outside the church and reaching within your church. Once the offerings are received, there is going to be the ability to track and distribute the resources that are received through the offering plate. It's going to require publicity, and you're going to accept donations. So if you're ready to get started, I'm ready. Let's go ahead and switch over to Church360 Ledger, and I'm going to be changing screens here. And everybody should be able to see my Church360 Ledger screen. And each person who logs into Church360 Ledger is going to have their own email address, which would be your username, and it's going to have a password. And I know that there's going to be some people watching the video who have Church360 Ledger and some that don't. If you don't have Church360 Ledger, of course you can go to 360ledger.com and sign up for a trial. So I'm going to log in as Pastor Kent Williams. He's a pastor here at our sample church here. So, and when I log in, that's going to allow me to access the features that I'm allowed to see. So Pastor Kent Williams, he's actually an administrator, and I'm going to go ahead and click sign in, and that will go ahead and sign me into the software. Let me try that one more time. There we go. And when you log into the program, there's going to be a main menu bar across the top. There's going to be an orange $sign. I typically think of that as the home button, and that's going to take you to the main screen here, which is the transactions view. And the reason why I call it the transactions view is because there's transactions running down the screen. So there's other aspects of this window, like balances for each one of your account type, your fund balance on the main screen. You have a date selector and ability to extract the information from the program. To the right of your home button, there's going to be a book selector. So with Church360 Ledger, you have the ability to have more than one set of books. So if your church has a daycare, a thrift shop, or a cemetery, each one of those could be a different book, and you could switch between those sets of books. To the right of your book selector, you'll have a few different icons. There's 5 of them. There's going to be your check queue, that anytime you create a check, that check will show up in the check queue for printing. There's a pending transaction icon, which allows you to either generate transactions that come over from Church360 members or generate recurrent transactions. So the transactions that come over from Church360 members are going to be deposits that are based on your Sunday offerings. So on the 19th, someone gave $200, and you could pull that transaction in. But there's also the recurrent transactions that we have set up for our monthly bills. To the right of the pending transaction icon is your report icon, which allows you to generate reports. Then there's a settings gear, which allows you to access the different administrative parts of the software, as well as the different areas that allow you to set up your site. And there's also your profile icon, which allows you to log out of the software and or access your user settings. And the user settings lets you change your email address for your login and modify your password. So let's go ahead and go to our settings gear here. And for our cancer care ministry, we're going to go ahead and add in a few accounts so that we can track the money coming in and going out of the church. So I'm going to go to chart of accounts. And here in our sample church, we have quite a few accounts in the system already for our other church projects and missions and things like that. Inside of Church360 Ledger, there are 4 different account types, and you'll see assets here. I'm going to scroll down a little bit. There'll be liabilities, income, and expense accounts. And the assets are always going to be the things that you own. So it's going to be your checking accounts, savings accounts, money markets, stocks, could be buildings, property, vehicles, so it'd be the things that you own. And we're going to add in a separate checking account for our cancer care ministry. And to add in an account, you'll use the new account button down here at the bottom. You'll also have the ability to create new categories as well. And when you're looking at our view here, you'll notice that some of the rows have little teal lines next to them and some of them don't. The ones that have the teal line, those are going to be categories, which are going to group accounts together, and the ones that do are going to be categories, and the ones that don't are just going to be accounts. So we're going to add in another account at our Central Trust checking account so that we can track the money in a separate checkbook for our cancer care ministry. So I'm going to go down to the bottom and click New Account. And I'm going to call this Cancer Care. And actually, I'm going to call this Central Trust Checking. Dash Cancer Care. I can put in an account number, and since the system is already started, I'll have to transfer money over or either deposit money into the account to get that balance in there. So since it's going to be its own checkbook, I'm going to check the box for can write checks from this account. And I can put in an account number, so it can either be the account number for the bank, or you could have your own numbering system like we do here, where you pick the different segments of the number and they'll represent a category or an account number. So I'm going to click Submit, and let me put in 0 here, and then click Submit, and that's going to allow me to create that account, and it's going to have a 0 balance. So it's going to put the account down here at the bottom, but I'm going to drag and drop that account into position. So you'll notice as I'm dragging and dropping the account, there's a little red triangle at the upper left-hand corner. And where that triangle goes is where the account is going to appear. And you'll also notice that there's a gap left to right for away from the margin, and that's also going to be an indicator for where the account will reside. So we have Central Trust Checking, then we also have Central Trust Checking for Cancer Care. Once I've gone in and I've made a few changes, I'm going to want to click the Save Changes button, and I do this periodically to make sure that anything I put in actually saves and is pushed over to the server. So as I'm making changes, it's cached on the PC, but once I click Save Changes, it's going to push it to the server and save that information. So please save often. So now that I've saved that account, I did put it in checking, so these are both checking accounts. And I'm going to click on the Central Trust Checking, and I'm going to change that name just a little bit. I'm going to put Main at the end of it. I'm going to capitalize that and click Submit. So this is going to be Central Trust Checking Main and Central Trust Checking Cancer Care. So they're going to each have different names, and there'll be different accounts that have different balances. And anytime that I receive money from for Cancer Care, I will deposit it into our Central Trust Checking Cancer Care. And anytime I need to purchase something for the Cancer Care mission, I'll purchase it out of this account. So I'm going to click Save Changes and confirm that one more time. And one thing that you'll notice in this window as well, there's also a New Restricted Fund button. With Church360 members, you'll have the ability to tie your restricted funds directly to the asset account. So you'll notice here for Central Trust Checking, we also have a building fund, memorial fund, scholarship fund. And looking at those funds, you'll see above them that there's a restricted fund. And the restricted fund is going to represent all the money that's not tied to, all the money that's not restricted within that checking account. So the balance on the checking account is $183,000+. $166,000 is unrestricted, and then we have $16,000 that's restricted within the building fund. We've overspent by $25 in the memorial fund, and we have $1,120 in our scholarship fund. So this money has been reserved for a specific purpose. And with Cancer Care, this checking account, all the money in that's going to be restricted. So if I wanted to add in additional restrictions, I could click the new restricted fund button, type in the name of the restriction, and click submit. So once we have our savings account in the system, I'm going to move over to liability accounts. So I'm going to click liabilities here. Excuse me just one second. Okay. And underneath liability accounts, these are going to be the accounts that represent the things that you owe. And in here, you can create new categories. So say that we get a credit card for the church for some purchases. I could create a new category and call that category credit cards and click submit. And then I could also create a new account called, let's call it silver card for our silver credit card. At that point, you could put in an account number and you can put in an initial balance. And let's say that the balance is 0, and then click submit. Then whenever we make purchases, we'll be able to tie those to this credit card. Then I'm going to drag and drop that card into position so it is underneath the category credit cards. And then whenever I run any of my reports, the order that I have here in this view will be the order that it prints out on the report. So I'll see the payroll tax deductions followed by payroll deductions followed by credit cards. So I'm going to save my changes, and once you start making multiple changes, you will see the different descriptions of the changes that were made. So I'm going to click on confirm, and then that will confirm my changes. With Cancer Care Ministry, we do want to track the way that the money is coming into the church. And we have different giving funds that are already being tracked in here, but there's other items like education, the ministries, miscellaneous, and others. So let's go ahead, and I would like to add it under the, so we're going to call our Cancer Care Ministry. So I'm going to scroll down and click New Account, and I'm going to call it Cancer Care Ministries, and I could give it an account number. With income accounts, they won't have initial balances, and expense accounts will be the same way. So I'm going to click Submit. Oh, let me type in 0 here. Click Submit, and then that's going to add in the Cancer Care Ministries. And I'm going to drag this and drop it into place. And you'll notice as I position these, I'm going to position them in alphabetical order. That ties back to what I was saying just a moment ago. When you go to print these reports or view these accounts throughout the program, they're going to be in the order that the item is positioned. So if I want these to be in alphabetical order, I'll drag and drop them into alphabetical order. And if I want them to be in numerical order, I can drag and drop these so that they're in numerical order by the account number. So the account numbers are not required, so you can make the choice if you want to enter in the name without the number. You can enter in the name with the number. Either option is perfectly acceptable. So I'm going to go ahead and save my changes and confirm, and I have the tendency to save often because I never want to lose anything. So the incomes are going to track money that's coming into the church, but if I go down to expenses, this is going to track money that's going out of the church. So with this Cancer Care Ministry, it's extremely important to us, so I'm actually going to create a separate category for this Cancer Care Ministry. So I'm going to go to New Category, and I'm going to call it Cancer Care. And then I'm going to call it Cancer Care Expenses, actually. Then I'm going to click Submit, and that's going to create my category. Now, there's going to be quite a few different needs for this ministry, and for us to track how that money is being spent and be good stewards of our money, we're going to need to make sure that we have the accounts in the system to track every single dollar that's being spent. So I'm going to click New Account, and I'm going to go ahead and add in refreshments. And then click Submit, and I'm going to add in advertising, I'm going to then add in resources. I'm going to add in one more, which is handouts. And then I'm going to reposition these inside of the category. Then I'm going to save my changes. So, and one other thing I want to do is I'm going to then drag the whole category and position that under our church expenses. So I'm going to take and pull it. I'm going to pull it above bank fees and then drag it over so that it's positioned below church grounds here. So when I run my reports, it'll say church grounds, and then it'll say cancer care expenses. So let me save my changes and then click confirm. And then once I've entered in my expense accounts, I would have completed adding the accounts into the system that I need to track the transactions for my cancer care ministry. Now, when it comes to the income and expense accounts, you can also have budgets with those accounts. So I'm going to go up to the gear here at the upper right and go to budgets. And every single category and account that we put into the system will show up here. Every single income and expense account that we put into the system will show up here inside of budgets. And you'll notice that we have cancer care ministries. We can put in a number that represents how much we expect to receive through the year for cancer care ministries, and say that we believe that we're going to receive $4,800. So we could click on the row and we can type in $200 a month, and basically you can either type and press tab. You can also copy and paste to fill in the budget numbers that you want. So, and we do have some enhancements coming to this report here in the near future. So, a few more here, and I'm going to change this one from, let's do $2,400. Okay, then I could go down and I could also, for our expenses, I could then go through and scroll down to our cancer care ministry expenses, and I could type in the dollar amounts on how much I plan on spending for each one of the expenses. Now, on the left-hand side, you'll notice buttons like previous year budget and previous year actuals. The first year that you enter in the budgets, you would have to type the numbers in, but subsequent years, you could use the previous year budget or you could use the previous year's actual. So, and if for advertising, I thought, it'd be $25 in a certain month, I could type that amount in. And if there was so much for handouts, I could type in that amount. And then refreshments, when we go on our trips, I could type in those amounts. So then I could also type in the amount that we would need for resources. And you'll notice as I'm typing in those amounts that the category total is increasing and changes. So each one of the accounts will total into the categories. So I'm going to scroll down to the bottom and click Save Changes, and then that will save any changes that I've made to the budget, and it will allow me to view those budgets on our statement of income and expense. So let me just type in a few more here. I'm just going to type in okay. Okay, and I'm going to click Save Changes. So once our budgets are in the system, we will be ready to enter in transactions. And prior to entering in any of the transactions, I just want to mention a couple other aspects of the setup. So there is the fiscal years, And for fiscal years, you can lock the fiscal years, and you can have a calendar or non-calendar fiscal year. So when you're initially setting up your books, you're going to specify the fiscal year that you're going to be using. So we have ours set as a calendar fiscal year, and when it comes to calendar, you can also have non-calendar fiscal years. So you can have either way, and you can change the fiscal year if need be as well. So, and then you can lock and unlock your fiscal years. So, so now after discussing that, I'm going to go to New Transaction. And when I click on New Transaction, there'll be 5 different types of transactions. And you'll notice throughout the product that the top part of the page appears in all of the screens. And that is intentional. That allows you to type in the name of the account and jump to that account whenever you click and select it. But also it allows you to create transactions no matter where you're at in the software. So you don't have to go to a specific screen to create those transactions. So the 5 different types of transactions are transfer, deposit, payment, check, and journal entry. And with these different types, you can just click on the transaction type, and that will kind of switch the view in the screen here and allow you to start entering in the transaction type. Now, I did see a message that just came by asking a very good question: do I have to enter in budgets to be able to enter in transactions? And good question there. You do not have to enter in budgets to enter in transactions. So you may have budgets for all of your accounts, or you may have budgets for some of your accounts. Some of your accounts may be non-budgeted. And you can go in and just enter in transactions, and you could actually enter in the budgets afterwards if you wanted to. So when you can adjust the budgets if you'd like. So entering in the transfer, let's say that we're going to transfer money from our checking account to our cancer care ministry account to get the ministry started. So we're going to take money basically out of the general fund and send it over to the cancer care ministries there. So whenever you do a transfer, this is going to allow you to transfer money from one account type to the exact same account type. So this goes back to what we were talking about when we were speaking about accountability. So say we were going to put $1,000 into this cancer care ministry to get everything going. So we would take the $1,000 out of our central trust checking, and then we would put that, our central trust checking, our main, and it's going to be unrestricted money. But then we're going to move that into our central trust checking cancer care. And this is just going to be a transfer. In most cases, you'll use this type of transaction to transfer money from one checking account to another, or to correct line item mistakes when you're you spent it out of an expense account A when you should have spent the money out of expense account B. So you can do that here with this type of transaction. Please note that there's a selection changer here, I guess you'd say. So if you start out with transfer, you could switch it to deposit or journal entry, whichever one you wanted to change it to. So you do have the ability to have a memo and change the date. So the memo would just allow you to follow up on this transaction later on down the line. So I'm going to just call this transfer to cancer care ministry. And then I can select the date that the transfer took place on. Then as I'm creating the transaction, it's going to automatically create the credits and debits for me. So whenever you are decreasing a bank account, that's going to be a credit. And anytime you're increasing a bank account, that's going to be a debit. So we're going to move that $1,000 over from our main checking to our cancer care checking account. So I'm just going to click Save, and that will create my transaction. And then I'm going to go to the home screen here, and I'll be able to see that transaction here on my home screen. And let me switch my date here at the upper right. Transaction took place in April, so I'm going to click on April to change the date. And let's see here, transfer to Cancer Care Ministry $1,000. And then also I can go to what they call the Omni bar, and I could type in Cancer Care here. And then I can select the income accounts, I can select the bank account, and then I could see the transaction there inside the bank account. So, and there is several graphs that you'll see throughout the program. So if I'm in checking, I'll see what they call the mini graph, and then you'll have your big graph down here, and I can go into Cancer Care Checking. And once we have a few more transactions, we'll actually be able to see a graph here as well. Okay, so once we've transferred the money in there, next, let's take a look at doing a deposit. And I can click on New Transaction here and go to Deposits. And for deposits, it's going to work very similar to like your transfer. So there's going to be a lot of similarity between all of the transactions. The results will be different, of course, depending on the type of transaction. So with this deposit, you can have a memo, and you can type in the memo. So if this is money coming from Sunday offerings, you can select the date, and I'm going to go back to Sunday, so I'm going to select Sunday there. Or if it doesn't hit the bank till Monday, you could select Monday. Then with the deposit, you're not going to have a payee, but you can select your bank account. So you'll notice here underneath assets that there's unrestricted, and there's also your restricted account. So if somebody gives money to the building fund, you would actually select the building fund to track the money going into the building fund and to restrict that money. But I'm going to select our Central Trust Checking Cancer Care here. And let's say that somebody gave $225 to the Cancer Care Ministry there. So we would select the bank account. We're going to put the $225 into the bank account. Then we are also going to scroll down and select our income account for Cancer Care Ministries. And you'll notice when you were doing this deposit that it's only going to allow us to use assets and income accounts. It's going to prevent us from creating a deposit into an expense account. That's one of the accountability and prevention measures that the software has. So once I have my memo, my date, my assets and income put into the system, I'm going to click Save, and that's going to create that transaction. So now I'll move up from $1,000 to $1,225 here. Okay, so that's how to do a transfer and a deposit. Let me mention that connection between Church360 members and Church360 Ledger again. So this would be a situation, the one I just did, of just the treasurer typing in the transaction. Now, if you have a financial secretary who enters your offerings into Church360 members, that deposit can be pulled down by the treasurer. So if I click on the deposit, I'm going to see that exact same window. But one thing you'll notice instantly is that you have these little buttons here that was not on the previous screen. The reason why these little images are here is to let you know that this is $100 from the mission fund, and this is $100 from the general fund. So when I'm pulling that money into the system, I could type a memo in, and this also could be Sunday offerings. Okay, and then I would select my bank account. So in this situation, I could mark the money as unrestricted, and then that would be $200. Then I would have to select the income account where that money is going to be stored. So that would be the mission fund, and then I would also select the general fund. So this little label here, that just tells me that the money's coming from Church360 members, and it was given to the mission fund. So I'm going to tie that into an income account for the mission fund. And the same thing for the general fund. So once I put that into the system, or once I made those selections, I would click Save, and that would save my transaction. And I can go back to checking and look at my deposits, and I would see my Sunday offerings there for checking. So, and actually, if I drill down to Central Trust Checking Main, I would just see that one single deposit. And that allows you to pull in the transactions from from Church360 members. So that's kind of like a handoff. So the whoever's entering in the offerings is passing that information over to Church360 Ledger, and it'll go through and update that information, and or it'll go through and hand that information over where the treasurer can pull that information into the system. So after entering in a deposit, next let's show the next transaction type, and let's actually do a check. So with Church360 members, there's two types of checks that you could enter into the system. So you can enter in your handwritten check, but also you can enter in a check that you're going to print out through the system. And with your handwritten check, you pull out your checkbook, write the check, and give it to the person. You can then go into the system here and fill in the memo. So say that we were writing a check for, I'm going to do snow removal. And at that point I could select the person or the company that's going to do the snow removal, and that person would be the payee. So I'm going to select Jim's Snow Removal. And I guess you'd say we just recently had a blizzard in April, and we had to pay him for this service. So there would be a check number on that check. Since it's a handwritten check, we'll know the check number, and we can type in that check number. So I'll do 1234. Then we would select the unrestricted checking account to pay for that amount, and say it costs us $100 to have him remove that snow. Then it's going to allow you to select an asset or a liability account. And the liability accounts would be used for like payroll deductions and items like that. So over here on the right, you would have expenses and liabilities. And your expenses would be where you're going to spend the money from. And liabilities would be used if you're going to reserve that money for some purpose. So at this point, I would go down and select, and I believe I have a snow removal account. So if I type in a few characters of the name, I'll be able to find that account and select it. So then at this point I would click save, and that would save that check. So once the check is saved, it'll send the check to the print queue, and if this was a check that we were going to print, we could go ahead and print the check out, and if this was a check that we were not going to print, we would remove it from the queue. So to access it, I could click that link, but I could also go to my print queue icon where I will see a list of my checks. So since the snow removal was a handwritten check, I would click on the line item, click on the little check here on the left of the line item, and then I will have two options. I can mark it as printed, and I can click the print button to print it. So since it was a handwritten check, I'm going to say marked as printed. This check will be removed from the print queue, and I'll click confirm. Then if this is a check that you entered in that you're going to print, so say that I have this Ameren UE check here. That's a local electric company in our area. So I can check the box here, and if I want to print a check, I would click print, and that would allow me to view the check in this format. So it's going to be a three-part check, with the check being the middle portion of it. Then I could go to print and confirm the numbers for the following check. So I would confirm the amount, but I'd also, since I'm using pre-printed check stock, I'd want to make sure that this is the correct number. So if my number was 4501, I'd make sure that the correct number was appearing. I would then go to confirm. That will allow me to pass the check from Church360 Ledger over to the web browser print controls, and then from there I could select my printer by clicking change. I could select any of the printers on the network or any of the ones that are connected to this computer, and then I could click print, and that'll actually send it over to the printer. At that time, what I would do is I would go over there and retrieve the check, and if the check looks correct, I give it the thumbs up, and then I would mark the check as printed. If something goes wrong with the check printing, I'll repeat this process. I'll click on print and then walk through those steps again until the check prints out correctly. So my check printed correctly, so I'll say mark as printed and click confirm, and that will move the check from the print queue. Okay, so that's how you would enter in checks and print checks. There's a couple other transaction types we still need to discuss. So we've done transfer, deposit, and check. There's also payment, and payment represents an online payment. You can, anytime you do a payment online, you could enter it in to the system. Now, you wouldn't want to use a check because that's going to represent a handwritten check or a check that's being printed from the system. This would represent like if you paid something through your bank online, or you went to a website and paid for it on that website. So you could type in the payee, and let's use our Allied Trash and Recycling. So we could select that account, and it could be, we could call this our first quarter trash bill. Then we could select our unrestricted checking account, and let's say it's $79.99 for 3 months worth of trash. Then we would select our trash removal expense account, which is going to be one of the accounts that we put into the system. So then I click save, and that would save that check, or I'm sorry, that would save that payment. And we could go back home and we could actually see that payment here in the system, and it would be the $79. So the only other transaction type to show would be journal entries. And journal entries would allow you to do those special types of transactions. So it's not going to be something that is like a check or a deposit. These are going to be items like bank interest, bank fees. It could be special types of transfers, so you could have as many line items as you would need there. You could type in the payee in the memo. So if I wanted to do bank interest or bank fees, what I would do is I would start by selecting our bank account and say that our Central Trust checking bank account earned interest. We could then go in and increase the account by debiting it. So say that the interest is $2.54. Then we could select our second account, which would be our income account for interest income, and then we could credit that $2.54. Then we could click save, and let me call this bank interest for the month of April. Let's say for April. Then click save, and then that would save the bank interest, and we'd be able to see that here. And looking at our running balance on the right hand side, we'd be able to see that our balance increased by that $2.54. We could also enter in our bank fees by using a journal entry as well. So I'm going to go to journal entries and select our unrestricted checking, and our second account would be our bank fees account. So we're going to reverse the debits and credits on this transaction. So to decrease our unrestricted checking, we're going to do a credit and say that the bank fees were $7.99. Then we would go to our expense account and put in the $7.99. We'll notice that the credits and debits do balance, so it is $7.99 on both sides, and we'll see that it turns green. Then we can simply click save, and that would save that transaction. You can go back and edit a transaction if a mistake was made, so you can go over here and click on the row. Usually I'll click on the date here on the left-hand side, and that would allow me to come back and edit the transaction. If I just needed to completely void that transaction, I could use the void button, but also I can make that transaction recurring, and I can copy that transaction. So with the make recurring, that just opens up this panel here where I can name my recurring transaction, specify the interval for where it's going to reoccur, then select the week, month, or day, and select the date. So if it's going to happen every other month on the 5th day, I could select that if I wanted to. So, and then click Save. I'm going to click Cancel on this one. And once that recurring transaction is entered into the system, when the time comes for it to be paid, it'll show here at your pending transactions at the top. And that's what these items are here. These are our recurrent transactions. So we're going to receive the interest income for our bank account. We owe the gas bill and we owe the electric bill. Okay. So those would be the transaction types. Once our transactions are in the system, then we can review them in several different places. So we can go here to our orange $ and see those transactions here in our transactions view, and we can drill down into those accounts. So let me go ahead and drill into like the income account, and as we drill down into it, we'll have offerings, other incomes, and non-budgeted incomes, and these are going to be our categories that we added into the system. So if we go to offerings, and underneath offerings you'll have funds, and then you'll be able to see the money that was given to your giving funds. So we would be able to see the money that went into the general fund, into the building fund, and we could actually drill down even further into those accounts if we wanted to. So we could go into the building fund and see the items that were put into the building fund. You can also go to the reports icon here at the upper right, and underneath that reports icon you'll have the different reports that you can access. So there'll be the general ledger report, and the general ledger report is going to be a transactions report. So you'll be able to see all the transactions for a specific date range. You could do a whole year, you could do a single quarter, you can do a month, and you can specify your own date range if you'd like. Then from there, you can collapse the item, and you can filter by using the, I guess, the column headers that have the little triangle to the right of them. So you could filter by type if you just wanted to see all of the checks. Any item that is in red, that's going to be a voided transaction. Let me switch back to all. And you could also filter by payee and account. So if you're looking for all of the transactions that you paid to the electric company, you could uncheck all, then you could say Ameren UE, and you'd be able to see all of those transactions. The same goes for accounts. So if you wanted to see all the transactions for your bank account, you could filter by your unrestricted checking account. So the little link icon to the right is going to be a grouping icon, and this allows you to either group by payee or by account. So I'm going to click on Group by Account, and once I do that, then I can see all of the transactions for the building fund. It's going to be alphabetical order. I'd then see Central Trust Savings, Electric, General Fund, and I'd be able to view that report there. And when you group, you can filter as well if you'd like. So you could just select certain accounts. Then once that was done, you'd be able to export this information to Excel, and you'd also be able to print it. So you could create your own running balances in Microsoft Excel. After the general ledger report, there is the income and expense report. And the income and expense report allows you to compare the money that came into the church versus the money that was going out of the church. And when it comes to those accounts, you can collapse them over here on the right-hand side. So every account is going to be in a category for your income and expense accounts. But you can collapse those categories, and you would just see the totals by category here. And then you can export that information to Excel. So at the very bottom of the report, there's going to be a comparison of income versus expense, and you can see if you're in the red or in the black when it comes to that transaction, or when it comes to your income and expense accounts. After the income and expense account, there is the chart of accounts report, and it's going to show you every single account within the system. With the chart of accounts report, you can collapse the categories on the left-hand side. It's going to show you your starting balance, ending balance, your debits versus credits, your percent change for your time period that you have selected. I'm sorry, your plus minus change for your time period that was selected, and also your percent change for that same time period. And the last report is going to be the balance sheet report. And the balance sheet report will allow you to compare what you have versus what you owe. So you'll be able to compare your assets versus your liabilities and see the financial health of the church there. So the column headers between the chart of accounts report and the balance sheet report are the same. It kind of makes sense that way. But you can collapse these columns, collapse the rows, and if you export this information to Excel, and I'm going to click the Export to Excel button, you can enable editing, and you can delete rows that you don't want, and you could sum up columns or rows that you do want. So you can manage the reports inside of Excel. So I'm going to close the spreadsheet there. And the last thing that I'd like to show is when it comes to your users, you can create roles and you can create users. So we have some sample roles that are in the system, and a role is going to be like the position at the church, and you as the administrator would be able to go in and specify what that role can do. So we have one here called council members, and with the role you can say which books that role can access. So for council members, they can see both the preschool and the church and Christ Community Church's set of books. You can say whether or not they manage the chart of accounts. They can view all accounts or a subset of accounts where you can go through and specify those accounts. You can say if they can or cannot create the different types of transactions, and once those transactions are entered, whether or not this role can edit those transactions or print checks. So once those decisions are made, you can click Submit to save the changes, and you can go to the gear and go to Roles at the top. I'm sorry, click on the gear and go to Users at the top, where you can invite people to the software. You'll just simply click on Add a New One, type in the email address, and select the role that you want them to have, and then click Submit. They'll receive an email, and with that email they would be able to create their login. So they'll click that link, that'll bring them back to the website, and that will allow them to access the software. So they'll create a username and password and log in. But that's all of the information that I had to present today. I did see some questions come in. So let me switch back to my PowerPoint here, and let me mention a couple things and we'll answer those questions. So if you don't have Church360 Ledger and you'd like to try it out, you can go to 360ledger.com and start your 37-day free trial. And also, if you have questions after this webinar, you can definitely give me a call or shoot me an email. You can also contact software sales. So my email address is rod.kiles@cph.org, and my phone number is 314-268-1315. And the information for software sales is softwaresales@cts.cph.org, and the phone number is 1-800-325-2399. Now I'm going to open up the question section here, and if any questions come up while I'm talking, you can definitely fill those in as well. So the next question was from James. For cancer care ministry, would the church actually do the bank? Would the church actually go to the bank and open a new checking account so there would be more than one checking account to reconcile every month? Is there an actual checking account for each ministry? And the answer would be depending on the church. Now, What I've seen over the last year and a half with helping people set up their accounts, um, sometimes churches do have separate checking accounts for certain ministries. Now, it just depends on the church. And I've also seen here lately that churches have separate checkbooks for money that's reserved, money that's restricted versus money that's unrestricted. So they'll have a checkbook for all unrestricted money and a checkbook for all of restricted money. So would that be the case? It really just depends on the church. But if your church doesn't handle the business handle the money that way, you could definitely have all the money inside of the same account, and you could use your restricted funds and your income and expense accounts to track the money being brought in and spent on that ministry. Very good question, James. I appreciate it. The next question is from Sharon. Can you enter the account number for the expense account when you're creating checks? And the answer is yes. So I'm going to switch back to Church360 members. And when you're in Church360 members, when you're in Church360 Ledger, I'm going to go to the gear and go to the chart of accounts. And underneath chart of accounts, I can go to expense accounts. And you'll notice that the account number is here off to the side and it's light gray. Now, the thought when we went through and we designed this software was that the account number would be optional. Now, if you want to use the account number to select the account, what you would do is type the account number as part of the name, and then you could take the account number out of the account number field. And I'm going to click submit, and I'm going to go down to the bottom and save my changes. So once I do that, anywhere where I would type the account name, I could actually type the account number. So let me scroll up here just a little bit. And so I could type in 016-01 and I could find that account. Also, when I went to create transactions, I'm going to go to check, and I could select unrestricted, and when I typed in the account number, the account would show up. So the answer is yes. It's just a little bit of a different approach when applying the setup or when you're going through and setting this up. So yes, you can. Okay, let's see. The next question is from Joyce, and can you use the same formatted checks as Shepherd staff? And the answer is no for that. It's pretty close, but it's not exactly the same. So I'm going to go to okay. And the company that provides the checks for Shepherd staff and Church360 Ledger is the company FormsPlusInc.com. So it's Forms Plus Incorporated. And if you go to their website and go to Church Supplies, you'll see the laser checks here. And depending on which form you have, I believe that the middle checks will work between the two products, but the top checks will not. So if you have top checks, that those won't work between the two products. So I'm going to say the answer is possibly. So if you have the middle checks with Shepherd staff, those should work with Church360 Ledger. Okay, the next question is from Linda, and she says, we are currently using Shepherd staff software. Please explain the difference between the two softwares and why we would choose one over the other. So the biggest difference between the two softwares, Shepherd staff is going to be a desktop-based software that can only be used on a PC platform. So anytime you have Shepherd staff, you have to have Microsoft Windows, and you'll have to have it installed on that machine. Now, your Church360 products are going to be web-based softwares which can be accessed from anywhere where you have an internet connection. So if you are on a Macintosh and you're on a laptop and you're at the bread company and you're having lunch, you could connect to the Wi-Fi and you could access the access Church360. Also, if you are on an iPad, you could access Church360. So one of the big differences is the portability of the product. And lots of people who switch will switch due to the fact that they want to be able to access the software from anywhere. Now, there are some differences between the products. So the goal was not to create Shepherd Staff on the web to take everything that was in Shepherd Staff and put that into Church360 Ledger. The goal was to create a new web-based church management software and to come up with something that was easy to use, that was going to be secure online, that people could access from everywhere. And that's been one of the main goals. So you'll notice as I was going through the presentation that things are there's less buttons, less options. There's kind of a focus on just making sure we're providing what the customer is going to need to get the job done. And it's going to be, in my mind, lots of times it's sometimes a little easier to use because of the navigation. But why would you pick one over the other? My main thought would be portability and being able to access it from anywhere. And hopefully that answers your question there, Linda. The next question is from Sig Johnson, and Sig says, when setting up a new account, as you showed in Cancer Care example, how do you verify or assign the correct general ledger accounts to make it match? Because you mentioned that you did not have to enter an account number, is why I ask. I want to ensure proper GL account assignment. Let me attempt to answer this here, see if I fully understand. So when you're setting up your accounts, okay, the account numbers are not required, so you don't have to have an account number. But when you put your information into the system, you're still going to be categorizing / grouping the accounts together. So as I'm looking at, or as you look at my setup here, we have a category called checking, and then we have two checking accounts here. Now, if I was using account numbers, I could go in here and I could type in 011-01-01-02 and click submit, and then they would have, you know, account numbers that lead you back to each other. Now, with the way that this is set up, you have these two grouped together based on the category that they're in. So when I go over to my reporting, I can go to my chart of accounts report. I'm going to confirm my changes here. And I'll still see my Central Trust checking and my Central Trust Cancer Care, and they'll still be under the same category, under the same heading. So how do you ensure it? You ensure it by making sure that when you add the account, you position it inside of the correct accounting. Let's see. Let me go back and read your question to make sure that I've answered that. So when setting up a new account, as you showed in Cancer Care example, how do we verify or assign correct general ledger accounts to make it match? Because you mentioned that you did not have to enter an account number, is why I ask. I want to ensure proper GL account assignment. So I would say the way that it's done, since it doesn't have account numbers, is that you're going to position it within the correct category when you create the new account. And please let me know if that makes sense there, Sig. The next question is from Linda, and she said, why would you lock a fiscal year? You would lock a fiscal year so that you cannot go back and make changes to the fiscal year. The next question is from James. Restricted funds are a sort of sub-account of the main checking account. That is true. If the church uses just one account, um, these take the place of dedicated accounts in Shepherd staff. Yes, sir, you are spot on with that. So if you had the comparison between the two products on the Ledger side would be that in Shepherd staff you have dedicated accounts, and inside of Church360 Ledger you're going to have restricted funds. So when people give money for that building fund in Shepherd staff, you put the money into a checking account and put it into that dedicated account. Now, when people give money in Church360 Ledger, you're going to deposit that money into, it's going to be your checking account, but it's also going to go into your building fund. Now, with restricted funds, those are bound to the checking account. So you're also going to have an account to track the income as well. So you would have a building fund for income as well. The next question is from James. And suppose the building fund, which is a restricted fund, is large and diversifies its asset over stocks, bonds, mutual funds, etc., more than just a checking account. Would the building fund have to be split into multiple building funds to match up with the assets funding the building fund? And the answer would be yes. So if the building fund is diversified, so you have a building fund in the checking, you have, I don't think I have any stocks here in my building fund, but you have several different building funds, you would have several different restrictions throughout the program. Several different building funds, several different restrictions. So if that building fund is diversified, then throughout your assets you would have more than one building fund, and I would probably, it'd be building fund dash stock or building fund dash checking or something along those lines, so that when I went in and I entered in my transaction, I'm making sure that I'm selecting the correct building fund. You are correct, James. There is a follow-up question from Linda. So then would it be a lighter version? And great question. Church360 Ledger, I would not think of it as a lighter version of than Shepherd staff. The between the two products, both of them offer fund accounting. Both of them offer all of the checks, deposit, journal entry, all of the transactions, budgets. I would say the only difference between the two, or I guess probably like the primary difference between the two, would be the number of reports inside of Church360 Ledger is less. We are taking feedback on reports, and we want to make sure to add in the reports that people want. It doesn't have the ability for FASB, so I don't know that many churches that use FASB, but when requests come in to add FASB, they'll add something in there at that point in time. I guess there's one other, there's an accounts receivable system inside of Shepherd staff, and this doesn't have an accounts receivable system. So there are some differences. I'd say the core part of the fund accounting is there with different books and all the account types, all the transactions, the ability to access it on the web, but there are some of those. Oh, I didn't mention payroll. There is the ability to do payroll in both of the products. So there's just some smaller aspects of it that they're waiting on customer feedback to decide if they want to implement into Church360 Ledger. This is a work in progress, so they are adding things as they are suggested. And if there's definitely if there's something that you'd like to see added in Church360 Ledger or something that I didn't mention, throw that into the question box. We take all the feedback very seriously, and we make sure to use that to make the decision for what we're going to add to the software. We decided not to go with matching it up one for one when it came between the features, because we know that there was some things in Shepherd Staff that people didn't use, so we wanted to make sure that we made the right choices, not just adding it because it was in Shepherd Staff, if that makes sense. Okay. Oh, thanks, Sig. Sig had a follow-up question or another question. Can you attach electronic invoices to payment transactions? That's a really good question. Unfortunately not, but I will pass that on to the programmers and the development team. I think that's a good idea there, to be able to attach images of those transactions, so you'll have some type of history there, and you can view the transaction there. So. Can you budget month by month? The next question is from James, and yes, you can budget month by month. So when you go into the gear and you go to budgets, you will be able to, give it just 1 second, you'll be able to enter in the budget for every single month. And earlier I mentioned it, but I didn't go into great detail there. We are enhancing the budgets view, so you are going to be able to put in a total here in the near future and divide that amount by 12, and then that would put in the budget. So you can right now just type in the dollar amount for every single month. Then when you go to your chart of to your statement of income and expense report, whenever you select that month, so say I select January, I would be able to see the budget for that month, and I would be able to see the actual and do the comparisons at that point in time. So you can do month-to-month budgets, yes. Okay. Well, if there aren't any other questions, I really do appreciate everybody's time. Oh, there's actually one more question. Thanks, Linda. I appreciate it. Is there a way to transfer / set up history from Shepherd Staff, or would this be starting over? Great question. We are currently using LogMeIn to access remotely, so portability is not an issue for us. I like that you are not restricted by account numbers versus layout. Yes. Okay. So the question is there a way to transfer the information over? There is a way to transfer from Shepherd Staff to Church360 Ledger. Now, I don't have that screen here, but you can upload the database and it does import the information. Now, the transfer allows you to go one or two directions. When you're transferring the information, you can, and I want to pull up my chart of accounts here. When you're transferring the information, if you have dedicated accounts, it will allow you to transfer in all of your accounts, the beginning balances, all of your vendors, and the payees. So if you have restricted dedicated accounts that are going to become restricted funds, you can only transfer in the accounts and the balances. Now, if you don't have dedicated accounts inside of Shepherd Staff, then you can transfer everything over, transactions included. The determining factor is going to be your dedicated accounts, because inside of Church360 Ledger, it doesn't have dedicated accounts. It has restricted funds, which are attached to your asset accounts. So they're not exactly the same thing. They're really close, though, but they're not exactly the same thing. And the difference is the fact that dedicated accounts aren't tied directly to asset accounts, but restricted funds are tied to a specific asset account. So when it comes to those transactions, there's no way for us to tell exactly which asset and which dedicated account go together. We can look at the transactions and see that, but there's even times where information isn't tied to the same bank account consistently. So with dedicated accounts, you could have put money from one checking account into that dedicated account, and then from another savings account into that dedicated account. So there's just not a way to manage that situation right now. So. Hopefully that answers your question there. The next question is from Joyce. And Joyce says, oh, thanks, Linda. And Joyce says, can you print a report that shows income and expense for unbudgeted restricted accounts as well? Unbudgeted restricted accounts. Good question. In the same report. I'm trying to think exactly what you're saying here. I don't think that there's a way to do that. Or at least the way that you're saying there, because when you create your, I'm going to go back to category or chart of accounts here. And when you create your restricted funds, they're going to be tied to your asset accounts. And the statement of income and expense, go to reports, income and expense, that's just going to show income and expenses. So it wouldn't show the restricted funds with the income and expenses, but I would say this though, when you create your, and I'm going to go back to the chart of accounts, when you create your restricted funds, like you create your building fund, memorial fund, scholarship fund, these are tied to your asset accounts. So you are going to have to create an income and expense accounts. And they don't have to be exactly the same. Like when you bring it in for the building fund, you don't have to spend it directly out of, now let me not say it that way. If you bring it in for the building fund, when you spend it, the account may not be named exactly building fund. So like in our example here, we brought money into our cancer care and our expenses were under a category called advertising, so it was cancer care advertising. So when you spend that money, you'll have income accounts and expense accounts. So now with this cancer care, let me add a new category here, and I'm going to call this unrestricted. Then submit. So I could have this category, and I'm going to put it down here at the bottom, and I could take the cancer care items and put those under a section called unrestricted. And I could put all my accounts and categories for money that's unrestricted in this category called unrestricted. So then when I go in and print my statement of income and expense, so I'm going to go to reports and go to income and expense. Then when I get down to the section that says unrestricted, I'd be able to see the total money that was spent that was unbudgeted or it was unrestricted. Okay, and does that make sense, Joyce? And you could post the follow-up there. Okay, so I have a follow-up question from James. So to transfer dedicated accounts from Shepherd staff to Ledger, we would probably first need to restructure, add asset accounts that will be needed in Ledger. The asset accounts in Shepherd staff, so that we have the restricted asset accounts available in the transfer template to allocate dedicated accounts correctly. Good question. When you transfer your dedicated accounts to, or when you transfer your information from Shepherd staff to Church360 Ledger, you're going to have asset accounts that are in there that you've been using with those dedicated accounts. They're just not linked together. When you go to do that transfer, there's actually a process where you attach the dedicated accounts to an asset account. Those asset accounts should already be in there, so the bank account should be there. And if they're not there, you definitely could restructure your chart of accounts and put them in there, but there should be some type of asset accounts in there. So, okay, and let me know if that makes sense. And actually, I could, let me see. 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 Um, And actually, let me show you um, okay, and I'm going to show the import here just 1 second. Okay, and I just reset this site. Okay, and when you are using Church360 Ledger for the when you're using Church360 or you're setting up Church360 Ledger, you're going to go to a screen that looks like this. So it's going to say create your first book, and then it'll allow you to import your Shepherd Staff database. So I'm going to open up Shepherd Staff here. And I'm going to the Shepherd Staff Finance here. And inside Shepherd Staff Finance, you're going to have assets, liabilities, equity accounts, income accounts, expense accounts, and I'm going to add in a dedicated account so that I can show how that linking is going to happen. So I'm just going to call it building fund. And I'll just give it $1,000 here. Okay, so that's going to be our dedicated account. So then I'm just going to close this and close Shepherd Staff. Now I'll go to Choose File, and here in the window I'll be able to browse to where my database is. So I'm going to go to my C drive and go to Shepherd Staff and import our database and submit, and that's going to take just a second to go through. But what it's going to do is it's going to pull over the database, and it's going to see if there's any dedicated accounts in the system. And even though I have it set to import everything, it's still going to check for dedicated accounts. If I know that I have dedicated accounts in the system, I can say import chart of accounts. I can say import chart of accounts only, import chart of accounts and balances only. I think that's what that said. So then, since it found the dedicated accounts in the system, it's going to say your dedicated accounts are listed below. They are being imported as restricted funds. So I'll have the building fund, and then I'll need to specify which one of the checking accounts here in the system that I want to assign the building fund to. So then I can say submit, and then it will continue with the importing process where it will just import my accounts and my chart of accounts. So let's see, and then that's going to take just a second to complete. Let me go back to the questions here. Okay. And while that's going, I'll read Joyce's next question. She says, I think so. The church board wants to be able to see the activity in the restricted accounts just like the budgeted income and expense accounts. We can't do that in Shepherd Staff now, which you would have the same kind of situation in Shepherd Staff. The dedicated accounts have their own report, and let me give that a few more seconds there. The dedicated accounts have their own report, and that is not tied into to the statement of income and expense. But I would mention this process here because I do think that that would work for you. It would tie everything together and you'd be able to see the unrestricted, unbudgeted money there on that part of your statement of income and expense. Let's see. The next statement is from James. So for what it's worth, we actually have a large building fund that has multiple asset types, but only one dedicated account. So we would maybe need to split the building fund into multiple building fund dedicated accounts so that they can be aligned with the assets. I think you're right. That definitely would be a difference between Shepherd Staff and Church360 Ledger. So a Church360 Ledger would make you create multiple building funds, but with Shepherd Staff you could use that one building fund and it would allow you to put money into that building fund through any of your assets. You are correct. No worries, Joyce. And let's see if this is going to refresh for me. So it said that it timed out there just for a second. Refresh this one more time. With our sample data, sometimes it can import a little funny there. So, oh, let me see here. It looks like it did not complete that import. Sorry about that, James. But that's the way the attachment would work there. So you can probably imagine how that would work now that I showed that connection. But basically, you'll for each one of the dedicated accounts, you will be attaching them to a bank account during the import process. The next question is from Linda. Hello, Linda. We have 20 dedicated accounts. In order to see the transaction activity for those accounts, would you need to create an expense account for each dedicated account? Not the transaction activity. To track all the money that's coming out of those building funds, you may want to go in and create the appropriate expense accounts. So, and I would probably advise that. But when it comes to the activity, and I'm going to switch back to the ledger view, and it looks like I got here just in time. You can go to one of two places. You can go to the general ledger, and where it says account, you could just select the building fund, and then that would show you all of the transactions for the building fund. And we could, let me click here, and we could group by. So then I'd be able to see all the transactions for the building fund. So I don't have to have that to see the transactions because the transactions would be tied to that restricted fund. But to be able to see the money that's, to be able to compare the money that's being spent out of the expense accounts for that building fund, I would need to create those accounts. So I would advise creating those, yes. Okay. Well, if there aren't any other questions, I'll go ahead and disconnect. You can definitely contact us. You can contact me, and you can contact the software support team, and you can contact the sales team if you'd like. So I hope this was helpful, and I will talk to everybody shortly. Talk to everybody soon. Okay. Thanks for your time today.